Today is March 8th, 2010. My name is Sue Paul. I am at the Jerome Airport in Jerome, Idaho, and I'm conducting a Veterans History Project interview in conjunction with the Library of Congress. Present in the room also is Allie Hill, who is doing the photography work, and Nancy Lane, who is a trainee. I will be interviewing today Mr. Harry Moyne. Sir, welcome. Thank you so much for coming. It's such an honor to have you here. If you could you state your full name, please? Your full name. Could you give us your full name?
Harry Moyne.
And could you give us your current address?
1130 Lawndale Drive, Twin Falls, Idaho.
And could you tell us where you were born and the date that you were born?
I was born July 21st, 1918 in Haley, Idaho.
And which division of the military did you serve in, and which years did you serve?
Well, I went into the old Army Air Corps in 1941, and I went directly to Oxnard, California as an aviation cadet and started my flying career at that time.
And that was during World War II then?
That was
War
actually before World War II.
Okay. Well, thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Harry, you were born in Haley, Idaho in 1918. What was Haley, Idaho like in 1918?
Oh, it was a quiet town. My recollections in particular are that, you know, there were a lot of sheepmen and stockmen, and it was just a quiet town.
Yeah, did you grow up in Haley?
I lived there until I was 10 years old, and my folks moved to Hagerman, Idaho in the fall of 1928.
So up until 10 years old, that was during the Depression years too. You were there. Do you have any memories of
No.
the effects of that in Haley?
No.
What did your father do for a living there?
Well, number one, the Depression didn't start until about 2 years after I left Haley. I lived in Haley during the 1920s, and my father bought some land northwest of Stanley, Idaho, and ran a packing outfit. In other words, he packed supplies to the various lookouts on the mountains, and I had a lodge. My mother ran the lodge, and when I was about 8 years old, I was able to be a horse wrangler, and so.
So you lived on a ranch then?
Well, we lived on an acreage up in the mountains. Actually, that's what it was. But then we moved to Hagerman, and in the 1930s, I was going to high school. Started high school in '31. And Hagerman was a very small town, approximately 300 people, and the small farms, and it was headquarters for several large sheep outfits, sheep operations, and because Hagerman has a warm climate and for the winter, and the livestock people wintered there, you see. But that's about it.
Did you have brothers and sisters?
I have one brother.
One brother. Was he younger or older?
He was 5 years younger.
5 years younger. So you went through high school in Hagerman, and what were your interests? What did you like to do in high school?
Well, I just normal. We didn't have any. I didn't have any special desires.
Just go through school.
Just lived, I guess.
Did you have any interest in aviation in those early years?
Excuse me?
Did you have an interest in aviation when you were in high school?
No, I did not. I didn't. even think about it, but I took my first airplane ride in May of 1935 in Salt Lake City because our Hagerman senior class went on a
Field
tour,
trip.
and we went out to the airport, and I got a ride in an airplane, an old open cockpit plane, 1935, and I was scared to death the whole time.
Never imagining you'd become a fighter
No,
pilot,
I
did you?
never.
Ever?
Yeah, I did.
So you graduated from high school then in the 30s.
I graduated from high school in May of 1935, and I went to Boise Junior College, which was just starting in the fall of 35, and then in the fall of 1936 I went to University of Idaho in Moscow.
And what was your interest for a career in going to college?
Oh, I started out and thought I might be a chemical engineer, and I soon gave that up.
Mm.
And I finally wound up as a I took a journalism class and an English major is what it was.
Did you have a girlfriend at this point, or were you married?
No, I wasn't married. And yes, I luckily had 2 or 3 of them. With, you know.
So
I did not. I volunteered in 1941 in May. Well, actually in April of 41 to become an aviation cadet. And at that time they had the program that if you had 2 years of college, you were eligible to.
why did you decide to do that?
Well, number one, because the draft was going to face me and I didn't want to walk.
And how old were you in 1941?
1941, I was 23 years old.
And had you heard rumblings of a war much earlier than that? I mean, when did the talk of war start in your experience?
Well, when I was in college, we were very aware of world affairs at that time, and as you recall from history, in 1939, Hitler had invaded Poland and so on. I don't think there was any question, at least most of the people out here knew that we were eventually, not that the United States was going to war, but that there would be a war. And it was also the draft had been started, and we had, the United States government had started building up. The Lend-Lease program had gone in. They were sending munitions and supplies to England. And so it just was obvious you better get in now.
No thought of the Pacific, though, no thought of Japan. It was all Europe, right?
It was all Europe at that time, yes.
So in 1941, you decided to join instead of being drafted, and where were you stationed for your basic training once you joined the Air Corps?
Well, we didn't have, or I didn't have that type of program. I wasn't stationed anywhere for basic training. I was sent directly to aviation cadet training in Oxnard, California, and then went into primary training.
Directly into primary?
Yeah.
Did you go in as an officer?
No.
Okay.
No. I had to go through primary in Oxnard and basic training, basic flying, I should say, at Bakersfield, California, and advanced flying training at Williams Field in Arizona.
I'm going to show these 2 pictures to the camera, so if you would tell us about this picture and what that sad look is about on your face.
Well, I don't know that that's a sad look, but if I'm not mistaken, that picture was when I was at primary training in Oxnard, California, and then, of course,
I think on the back it said something about a first solo.
okay.
Was this after your? It said the sad look is because it was after my first solo. Do you remember your first solo?
No. Yes, I remember it very well. My instructor was a much older man who had learned to fly in 1920 or 21, and prior to coming to work as a instructor for cadets, he had been flying in South America, and he was very, very interesting person. And I was slow to solo in primary. And it took me about 12 hours, but he worked with me and helped me. Interestingly enough, when I went to basic training, I was the first one in the class to solo, so who knows?
Now you're initially training at PT-13, is that correct? Mm-hmm.
That is correct.
Yeah. How'd you like that PT-13?
Well, it was a beautiful airplane. It was an open cockpit, of course, but yes, it was a real good training.
This picture, it was taken at Minter Field in Bakersfield, California, and it's a little bit bigger airplane.
Well, yes, it's called a BT-13, stands for Basic Training, and it had a 450 horsepower engine, and it was there again was an open cockpit, or not an open cockpit, but a tandem.
Mm-hmm.
I had an interesting thing in the basic training, because on one of the flights, the instructor was in the front seat and I was in the back seat, and the canopy was not fastened properly, and in one of our maneuvers, the canopy tore off and grazed my head. And I had goggles on and a helmet, a cloth helmet, you know. But it bumped my head pretty good, and then we came back in and landed, and I always remember the other cadets as I got out of the plane and I had to walk right through the line, my head bleeding. And I remember their looks.
I bet you do. What did your instructor say?
Oh, I don't remember that.
He probably said, "Buckle up." Do you think? I'm going to show your flight record, because this is all your training. You were in PT-13, BT-13, then you went into the AT-6s.
That's true.
And then you went in, it says the BT-15, the A-10-11, which are the double, twin engines. And this is, your record. With your permission, I'd like to put this in your film. Which of in your basic training before you went into then you went into advanced training, which is the AT-6. What were your favorite? Did you have a favorite that you really enjoyed more before you actually got into the fighter planes? Did you have a favorite trainer?
Well, the various airplanes you see there were all flown after we got into advanced training in Williams Field. Williams Field had AT-6s and AT-17, AT-9, AT-11. Those were twin engines, and so we had the advantage there of training not only in single engine planes, but twin engines. Mm-hmm. And so what you showed there was just a part of my Form 5 to show what the government records were.
Mm-hmm. Were you, at what point, or were you given a choice whether you wanted to go into bombers or become a fighter pilot?
No, I wasn't. I was never given a choice.
Really? Okay.
When And I graduated as a second lieutenant on the, I believe, the 21st of May, 1942. They immediately said, "You're going to stay here at Williams Field and be an instructor."
Really?
And then they sent, well, they gave me orders to go to McClellan Field in California to train as an instructor in 18-9s. 18-9 was a twin-engine airplane that had a very high wing loading, as I recall, about 25 pounds per square inch, and if you cut the throttle on it, it would drop like a rock. It was a good training airplane.
Sounds like it was worth 1,000 words to an instructor. There are some airplanes that are like that, yeah. Huh. How long did you stay there as an instructor?
Oh, I stayed there until January or February of 1944.
Okay. Now, you were in which fighter group? What was your...
I was in, I was sent to England with a group of 200 pilots that were gathered from various airfields. The powers that be decided that during the operation had been planned to invade the continent, that they needed to beef up their pilot pool, and they projected, more losses probably than actually occurred. But anyway, they sent 200 of us over to England, and they just picked out automatically. I went to P-47, some of my friends went to P-38s, some to P-51. We weren't given any particular choice.
So
we were all qualified, all of us, to fly in any of them.
had you ever flown a P-47 before?
Well, no, not. But we were sent to, from Williamsfield, I was sent to Florida, and we did train in P-47 before we went overseas.
What did you think of the P-47?
Well, P-47 was a very, very large, powerful airplane. And of course, the three fighter type aircraft, the 38s, 51s, and the 47, were all comparable in that each one had different characteristics, but they were basically all the same.
How did you all go over? So you were, I'm just reading your records here, so you were transferred from the 495th Fighter Group into you're transferred to 356 Fighter Group. Was that when you went to England, the transfer occurred?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And you're part, of course, the 8th Air Force. Did you go by ship?
Yes.
How many guys on ship? Mm-hmm.
We went to New Jersey and embarked from there. And there were only the 200 of us that I mentioned on one of the big ocean-going ships. And there were something like 5,000 or 6,000 black troops who were on the ship. And they were all quartered, of course, in the lower decks. And I always remember that forever, because you're quarter that many men, no matter who they are, and going across the North Sea and was a little rough. You had some rough weather, and so it was rather rough conditions. But we were on, I think, 13 or 14 days crossing.
And the 200 of you were on an upper deck because you were pilots, you were officers, right? And the rest of the men were enlisted men or whatever. Yeah, they were not officers. Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. Interesting. Where did you arrive then? Where did you debark? part of England did you?
Well, I think it was Liverpool, and we went from there by train to where I was sent was a place called Martlesham Heath, and it was near Ipswich, but you'd have to have a map to show you.
Mm-hmm. Is that where you were stationed during the time that you were there? How long were you in England?
Oh, approximately 8 months, I guess, 7 or 8.
Could you tell us about that 8 months and what you did, and you're flying in the P-47? What your job was?
Well, the job was just as a fighter pilot, as a replacement pilot. All of us, as mentioned before, were sent into the replacement pool. The 356 fighter group was comprised of 3 squadrons, and I was in the 359th squadron, as I recall. Our job, of course, we started out flying as wingmen, and as the summer went on,
Did you escort bombers?
our primary mission was to escort bombers. And what would happen there is that the bombers would start out very early in the morning, and it'd take quite a long time to form up a complete bomber squadron. And the fighter would have a set time that they would meet the bombers. In other words, you didn't start out with the bombers. Somebody would wait, but they'd meet the bombers as they crossed the channel, as an example. And we might meet them at some place over Belgium. And the next group of fighters would, after we'd spent 15 or 20 minutes or whatever time with them, there'd be another group of people would come in. And it had to be coordinated because all the fighters couldn't stay with them for only so long. And as the bomber missions kept going further and further into the continent, on into Germany, for instance, we had drop tanks on our aircraft and so on, but we were limited with the P-47s as to how far and how long we could stay.
Did you have a lot of combat experiences during these missions?
Well, I didn't personally have we didn't have any aerial combat that I didn't get a chance to. Once or twice, see German airplanes below you, but we were assigned to do a thing you couldn't break off. You went to do what your job was. And yes, we did see other flights of German ships and so forth, but we never, in my particular case, never engaged one of them.
Were these B-17s primarily that you were escorting?
Well, both B-17 and B-24. After you go on and meet with the bombers, we would be able to come back and search and destroy. I have my combat film, and we were able to shoot up quite a few trains and cars and things like that. I have the film of that.
Out of your airplane?
Mm-hmm.
That's great. You had 68 combat missions. That's an extraordinary amount of missions in only 8 months. So you went out daily almost then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
During the summer of 1944, that was a very busy period. The first mission that I flew was on the morning of the 7th of June. D-Day was the 6th day of June. And we went out before daylight, and as we came out over the channel, and you could look down and see all the thousands of Allied ships in the channel, and our job was to go back of the lines and shoot anything that moved, because the troops were landing and forcing their way inland, and our job was to see that the Germans didn't come in with something. So that was my first one.
Your adrenaline must have been racing pretty high on that. What a sight!
Well,
and also what a responsibility.
What?
Yeah.
Yeah, and when your first combat mission into it, yes, your adrenaline is high, and also when you have flak bursting around you, you realize that those people are shooting at you.
This is real. Yeah, we're not in training camp. Jeez. Yeah.
But you get used to the flak. There was one thing that you always get used to after a while, especially at altitude. It'll break, and you can lead it. In other words, if flak's breaking this way and you speed up and go around, it'll follow you but won't quite catch you.
It's pretty violent though, isn't it? When flak hits,
Yes,
you know you've been hit. Yeah.
You've seen pictures of the great bursts of flak all around you. Well,
yeah. And flak basically is just pieces of metal that they're shooting out, isn't it?
Oh yeah,
that's what it is.
It's a big,
Don't have that
actually,
today.
it's a bullet, a projectile that explodes at that altitude.
Right. In Normandy invasion, had you heard anything? I know it was so secret. Had you heard anything on your base where you were stationed about the invasion before it happened? Had you heard any rumblings or?
No, we didn't have any knowledge of when it was going to happen. We just knew it would. That's all there was to it. There, so many people were built up, and everything was there.
I wanted to ask you, if I may, about this picture of you and your brother. Could you tell us about this? What this is about?
That picture was published, I believe, here in the Times News. It was sent because I was wounded, took a hit over Germany, and my brother was wounded very seriously, and he took a hit on he was based on a carrier off of the coast of Japan, and a kamikaze came down hit the ship and killed the pilot sitting next to him. And my brother spent a year, came back to the hospital in Bremerton, Washington.
What ship was he on?
Well, I
It was
want
an
to say,
aircraft carrier.
yeah, I think it was the Wasp, but I'm not sure anymore.
You were wounded because your airplane was shot up pretty bad. What happened with that?
Well, I was strafing a German airfield, and I shot up a MA-110, and as I was leaving, I took a hit under the airplane and blew the canopy off and cut the primer lines, and all of a sudden you really understand when they're shooting at you, because you hear all the stuff. The canopy's gone.
Very noisy.
All the noise changes.
It says that you were so weak from your loss of blood that another pilot accompanied you in to land.
No, not particularly. The what happened is that I did take some flak on my shoulder and my arm and so forth, but and I was wearing a Mae West flotation thing over a leather jacket, and the wounds weren't bothering me very much. Although I was bleeding inside, I didn't know that. But the problem I was having is that you cut the primer lines in them, you're sitting in gas there.
Yeah.
And you had to fly all the way back to England. And yes, our wing leader led me back to where the airfield was.
Did you know your brother had been injured?
No. I had no idea. All this was written up later.
Were you and your brother in any kind of contact with each other? You were fighting two different wars, but how long did you go without having contact with each other?
Well, I don't know. He was from a completely different area, and yet I didn't know where he was.
Mm-hmm. After your injury, then, were you brought back to the United States?
No.
Where did you go?
No, I wasn't hurt very badly, and I spent a day in the hospital or something. I went right back to the squadron, and I went back to flying because frankly, I wanted to get back in here. I didn't want to, as I've seen some people get afraid of flying. So you get back in and get used to it again.
Mm-hmm. How many more missions did you have after that then? Were you about halfway through or three-quarters?
Yeah, approximately, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so when you found out you were going to come home, first I guess I would ask you, do you have a most memorable experience when you were in England during that period of time, flying those P-47s? Good or bad? I mean, could there be some good ones you could share with us to put on your film about being in England during wartime? What was England like?
England like? Oh, England was, well, number one, we were flying all the time, so we really didn't do much. I had a couple of trips into London, and, on weekends or for days off. But the thing about England is that it was a rural area, especially where we were, and it was very pretty, most of it, but I just didn't get around very much.
Mm-hmm. When did you became a flight commander? When did that happen?
Oh, later in the summer of 1944.
Was it after you came home?
Oh no.
While you were still in England?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, after I got back to the States, I was assigned to Lukefield, and I was put in charge of a squadron. Had a basic reason to retrain prisoner of war returnees. A number of prisoners of war who were pilots had been shot down or were incarcerated for various reasons. They were sent back to Lukefield and given a refresher course because some of them had not flown an airplane for 2 or 3 years. And that was an interesting assignment.
I bet it was. Were you preparing to go to Japan, to go to the Pacific? Did you see a buildup of that after you came back?
Yes, but in May of 1944, 1945, excuse me, in May of 1945, it was evident that the war was going down. They didn't need anybody anymore in the Pacific. So the Air Corps at that time came out with a directive, and they had a point, what they call the point system. And if you had a certain number of points, you could apply for discharge. I don't remember the bottom line, but I had over 3,000 points because I came in early and had combat and had the whole thing. So I got out early. I was sent to California and got discharged. And because I joined the old Army Air Corps, I was entitled to a bonus of $1,500 a year for each year that I served.
Jeez, that's great.
And,
when you were in Europe before you came home, was it pretty obvious that the war was coming to an end in Europe?
yeah.
I mean, the defeat of Nazism was pretty obvious, wasn't it? Yeah, it was happening pretty fast. Did you ever have any encounter or experience with any of the Russian pilots?
No, the only experience I had was with a bomber pilot, a friend of mine, who had flown the B-17 and gone right on across Germany and then had to land in Russia. And his description of the way the Russians treated him, I never forget, because the Russians, one or two of them got on his plane, held a gun to his head, and they were actually terrible.
They were our allies in name only, really,
Yeah,
for them to get their land back, yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, that's interesting. I've heard the same thing many times. I wanted to ask you, you received the Air Medal with 3 oak leaf clusters. Could you tell us why you received that?
Well, basically everybody got about the same thing. You were flying all the time, and you were entitled to, you were given the Air Medal, and if you were in effect entitled to the same thing again, you got an oak leaf cluster instead of the actual medal.
I'm just going to put this up while we're talking about it because it shows you being given receiving your not only your awards but also being raised to a captain in the 8th Air Force in England. You also received, of course, the Purple Heart from your injuries that you described to us.
Yeah.
And then the Distinguished Flying Cross. Could you tell us about that?
Well, the same thing as the Air Medal. You were recommended for a Distinguished Flying Cross because of the flying that you did.
Your 68 missions, which was in...
Well, not because of... I didn't have 68 missions then.
Oh, when you received it? Okay.
Just whatever I would have done at that time.
Okay. This is a really good picture of your receiving your captain rating, and I think it's nice to put that in. You sure haven't changed much.
Excuse me?
You haven't changed very much.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And also to put in, this is a certificate of battle participation. What is this for? This award, this certificate that I'm going to show. Certificate of battle participation for, of course, you, First Lieutenant. That's your grade, Army Air Corps. And what were you given this for?
Well, you're looking at the front of that card. If you'll turn the card around and you look at the back of it, it's just a compilation of the time spent and the missions and so forth, and signed by an officer in the group.
The group commander, yes. These are your medals.
That's
This is
true.
when you received them. Let's come home then. You came back to the United States, to Luke Field, and where were you when the atom bomb was when the war ended? Where were you stationed when the war? You were out of the service. You had left, and where did you go when you got out of the military? Where did you decide to go? In '44, did you come home?
Oh, I came home. Went to work for the bacon sheep outfit. Because my father was a foreman for a large sheep company, and during the war they had lots of problems with hell, and he was glad to have me back home, and so he sent me out to, in the summer of 1945, I went to Stanley Basin, and the attended camp for 3 bands of sheep. And of course the war actually in England and Europe ended in, as I recall, in April, sometime in April of '45. And then I was still working for the bacon sheep outfit in the fall, or what was it, August of '45, the Japan capitulated.
Where was your brother? Was he out of the service already also, or was he still serving?
Well, he was in the hospital in Bremerton, California.
Okay, he never went back in the service then.
No.
Yeah. Okay. But he survived.
He's oh yeah.
Okay.
And he lives in Hagerman now.
What did you hear about the atomic bomb when it was dropped? Was it a surprise? Was it that we had that technology? I mean, it was such a highly classified secret.
Well, yes, it was a surprise. I wasn't aware of it, but I personally, I thought it was a proper thing to do. It saved a lot of lives.
The war was over.
That's all. You had to get it over.
Right. Had you finished college before you entered the service?
I never actually finished college. I left before I graduated because I went to California. I had in 1939 I had an offer to go to work for MGM. It didn't materialize, but we drove to California and stayed in walk-up apartment, another football player, and I went down and that's what we did. We didn't have any money, but we had a good time.
I bet you did in those years in Hollywood. Did you ever utilize the GI Bill after the war was over? Okay, and you had not married at this point yet?
Oh yes, I was married in January of 1944 because we didn't. I didn't think we were going to leave William Field. And shortly after we married, we got orders to go overseas.
So you met her.
That's normal.
That was wartime. Did you meet your wife then? You met her while you were stationed at Williamsfield.
Yeah.
What is her name?
Her name was Joy, J-O-Y.
Joy. Okay. And so then you were stationed in England, and she stayed here.
Stayed in Phoenix.
Yeah, in Phoenix. And when you came home, did you all have children after you were out of the service?
No, I just had one. I had one son. And we didn't have children until we moved to Idaho.
What did you make a decision on what you wanted to do for a career at that point, or how did that fall into place?
And when I came back, as I told you, I went to work for sheep outfit, and then in the fall of 1945, I had saved a little money, and I borrowed some money from the bank and bought a small band of sheep, and I took them. I went over to Wyoming and bought them, brought them over to Buell, Idaho, and pastured them, and then sold them in the spring. And the next year I formed a partnership agreement with an older sheep man, and I bought some sheep in California and brought them up here to Idaho and ran them. So I just worked into the sheep and ranching business.
And you've stayed then in this area?
Yes.
You stayed here then?
Right. I stayed in the ranching business and bought 2 or 3 small farms until I went broke. And this is the truth. I had some bad luck with some sheep, and I had to sell them. And I paid off all my debts, but I didn't have anything left. So I bought a book and bought a real estate and went to Boise, and I took an exam and became a real estate broker in 1953. Got a broker's license.
Did you own your own company then?
Yeah.
And you stayed with that for how many years?
Well, I'm still working.
Oh, good for you. Did you keep up your flying? Did you keep your pilot's license? I mean, after flying a P-47, what the world could you go to next? I mean, that's just the best of the best.
First thing I did, I was in 1946 or 7, 46, I think. I hitched a ride in a truck with a trucking outfit that was based in Hagerman. And they were going to Phoenix, and they dropped me off below Wickenburg at the entrance to what we call the satellite field, where they had a lot of surplus airplanes, and I bought a BT-13 for $500 cash, brand new. And I walked in, all I had was a little satchel with me, and I had to walk into the gate, and I wanted what I wanted, and I told them I wanted to go to operations. And as luck would have it, the major in control of the operations was one of the pilots who had worked for me when I was at Luke. And so he picked out this BT-13, and I looked it over, and he said, okay. He was ready to go home, early in the afternoon. I said, hey. I made him take me a run air patch one time before. I hadn't been in the BT-13 for years. I didn't know where, you just don't know where everything is. It takes a little time. So that's what I did. And I bought several airplanes after that, and I built an airport in Hagerman, Idaho. And I got a walk of it in. So forth. I bought a Taylorcraft, and then later years I bought a straight-tailed Bonanza called a Debonair.
So you kept up your flying then?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. It's pretty. Do you ever think back on flying that P-47? All those hours you?
No.
Never? Yeah.
No.
Oh, that's good. You moved on. Do you have grandchildren?
Oh, my son never had any children of his own, and so we have some stepchildren.
Well, before we end our interview, is there anything else you'd like to have on this film as a part of your history?
No, not particularly. I might show you one thing.
Okay.
I have a picture of that.
Of the Hagerman Airport. This is the airport?
That's right.
Oh, all right. You started that. That's something. All of us pilots know where that is.
Well, that one was long gone. I was never. It was an interesting thing.
It was interesting? Yeah.
The reason that was interesting is that good friend of mine owned a ranch called the Buckeye Ranch, which is located at Hagerman in the bend of the river. And if you'll recall, in Hagerman and along towards King Hill, the round boulders that are the relics of the Bonneville flood. And the flat up here where this airport was built was covered with these boulders, but it was flat. So I had bought BT-13 that I mentioned, and my brother and my friend, his name is Robert Gardner, we just formed a partnership, and we hired some people from Bellevue, Idaho, to come in with some big equipment, and we built marked out these runways out, just dirt runways. Then we advertised that we were opening a new airport and having an air show. And the gals took tickets, and we had everything going, and people from all over the area came to the air show, and we charged admission, and we had some planes from Gooding come in, and we had some balloon busting, and I flew the BT-13, and every time a balloon would get away from any of the lower planes, well, I'd come in and break it, and then I gave rides. We paid for the airport in one day.
Oh my word. When did it close?
Oh, I finally got tired of it, and I don't remember, sometime in about 1955 we gave it up.
None of us certainly know where our life paths are going to take us. I mean,
No,
we don't have a clue,
never
do
know.
we? I mean, you were born in a little tiny town of Haley, Idaho in 1918, and then you lived in the little tiny town of Hagerman, Idaho, and you and your brother both were thrust into a war that no one expected, and you served our country. You flew missions in a very powerful airplane, the P-47, that was certainly one of the planes that helped win World War II. Had an extraordinary number of missions in 8 months, and then came back to this country and became very successful in your own right with your sheep business, and then with a real estate company, and had an airport. My gosh, I mean, would you have ever expected, married, had a son, ever expected that your life would take you in so many successful directions unwittingly, without your even knowing it was going to happen? If you could leave a message for the generations of young people that are going to see this film over time through the Warhawk Air Museum and through the Library of Congress, and through your own sharing of the one that we'll be giving you as a gift, if you could leave some message or some thought that you have about how that time during World War II, as a military person, as a pilot in the Army Air Corps, as a man who actually was in combat, how did that help form you to become the man you are today? And what lessons do you think you learned during that extraordinary time?
Well, number one, the military experience, in particular the cadet experience, the training, the organization was especially good, at least for me. And I think that all young people can benefit from that type of training. And I see too much of it anymore that people, well, and a good example is that the dress and the manners have deteriorated to a great extent, where during the time that I grew up, you, if you went someplace, you dressed up. And now people don't do that anymore. They don't have, well, some don't have good manners, and they, I don't think that the moral fiber is as good as it was at that time.
You did live during an extraordinary time.
Yeah.
You are the greatest generation.
Okay.
I'm going to show this because I love these two together before we enter it. This is the picture of you during World War II, a young man in his early 20s. And then this is you at 90 years old. I'm telling you, you haven't changed a bit. And the picture during World War II was taken in England. That's 1944. And you're sitting in the cockpit of a P-47. Well, I want to express to you how much it means to us and to our country that you've given us this honor of preserving your history on film forever. We want to thank you so much for being an American veteran. This wonderful country that we live in, it's still the best one in the world, truly is what it is today, and we have what we have because of men like you that gave up, whether you chose to or not, you gave up part of your life to serve our country and help protect it and protect the rights that we have today. And we thank you so much for doing that. We honor you as an American veteran, and we're very proud to say that you belong to us, which we feel you do.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.